Ben met up with the others and showed them a holodisc that he'd gotten that morning of a little girl who was blue in color talking about how she hated war. But sadly, she and her family had to be forced to be a part of it, and wanted to know if he and his friends could come there and stop everyone from fighting. Kevin calls Ben a softie but agrees to join them in the mission, and so does Gwen and Lucy, with Ship barking happily wanting to go too, while Julie was off to the side recording, staying hidden. She'd wanted everything she could get before reporting it. A good reporter gets all the facts before they start any accusations after all. And whatever happened during the battle had killed the feed for the fight, so no one knew or had any footage of him fighting that squid guy except for her, because she wasn't broadcasting it to anywhere, only recording. Ben says to Ship that it was time to go, and the little galvanic mechamorph barked happily, changing shape into that of a spaceship, and they began to go on inside through the cargo hatch, and once strapped in, headed on off to go to this kid's homeworld to stop them from fighting and hopefully figure out a solution that benefited everyone. Once everyone was strapped in, they headed off to this kid's planet to figure out how to deal with the situation the best. Though honestly, Kevin had his doubts about how they were supposed to handle that, and Ben says that he's got that covered, with a wink. They just have to keep them occupied until the right time. Gwen says that she likes how Ben cares enough to come help even if there's no money in it, and Lucy agrees with that statement, saying that the plumbers should help in times of war, and then asked what Ben's plan was, to which he'd stated that they needed to stop the fighting or at least postpone it until a special contact he'd made appeared to set things straight. Kevin asked who this contact is exactly while they were landing on the surface of the planet, and Ben says that they are someone who could for sure end the fighting. Though before they could land, the red guys and the blue guys both started to fire at them. He tells Ship to get out of sight until it's safe to land, and jumps from there, changing into Lodestar, landing on top of one of the turrets, and magnetizes all the weapons from the red side into a big ball before letting it drop and telling them to stop fighting. The red leader then says that the blue guys attacked them, and that they were defending themselves, so Ben questions this and tells them that they all need to stop when the blue guys start to attack, and so Ben magnetizes their weapons as well, letting them drop after being magnetized into a big ball. Ben changed into Spider Monkey and used his webbing to yank both the red leader and the blue leader over to him before changing back into human, and lifting both of them up, slamming both their heads together, surprising all of the soldiers. This war is stupid. You're fighting over what color some guy is? Who gives a damn what color he is? The real question is, did either of you get what he was teaching? And the answer is no. He then slammed both their heads together again as Ship lowered himself, opening the cargo hatch, and Ben walking up the hatch into the cargo bay. Ben then called out to the soldiers, telling them that they needed to make peace, and he would be taking their leaders to the statue, and they all needed to come there unarmed. The little girl that messaged Ben looked surprised by how he was handling things, and didn't quite understand. She'd always thought he was some sort of hero, but the way he was acting didn't really seem all that heroic to her. And she watched on upset as Ben basically kidnapped both of the group leaders. Still, she tried to justify it, saying that maybe he was taking them both without the armies, so that they could learn to work things out without being able to fight in the process or something. They were trying to get the two leaders to sit down and stop, and they just kept arguing about if their prophet named Zabin was red or if they were blue. And this quickly led them to start fighting on top of a stone they were using as a makeshift table. And Ben and Kevin pulled them apart, slamming them both onto the stone, making them both bleed. Ironically, the red guy's blood was blue in color and the blue guy's blood was red in color. Ben told the two of them that they needed to stop because all of this fighting is bad for their health, with Kevin adding that they wouldn't want to have to be disciplined again, did they? The two stopped fighting and used the sleeves of their shirts to wipe the blood off their faces, growling angrily. Gwen asked why exactly it matters what color Zabin was exactly. The two began to try to go off, but couldn't actually think of a good reason for that, other than it just does, with Lucy face-palming and asking the two of them, isn't their teachings meant to be more important? Then asked the two of them what were their teachings anyway. That the red and blue leaders both agreed on. The great Zabin was a wise sage who'd given them their laws and taught them the right way to live. However, the paint had faded away and now they needed to figure out what color they were. Then began to argue again, with Ben and Kevin both smacking them in the back of their heads. The voice of an elderly being spoke up, seeing what was happening, and said that they were very disappointed in both of them. The two looked around as someone was teleported downwards, and both leaders looked shocked as their monocles fell off their faces in surprise. Lucy asked Ben if this is who they were waiting on, and he says, yup. The person that spoke up was a perfect match for the statue, only the thing is, they weren't red or blue, they were purple. They then walked over to speak to them individuals, splitting into two, one red and one one blue. The red one talked to the blue leader and the blue one talked to the red leader. After a few moments, he'd refused into his purple state and told the two of them that the color of their skin does not matter. What matters is what you do with the gift of life bestowed upon them. Also going on to tell them that they've made very poor choices up until now. The two armies had managed to get their tanks and some blasters they'd had in reserve and were approaching the area with the red leader and blue leader both running over to their troops, calling out for them all to stop, saying that the statue was holy ground and not to fight there. They told all their troops to leave the tanks and disarm themselves and leave behind their weapons. The little girl, Probity, came over hearing the two leaders calling for a disarmament and to go in peace, and began to go too, wanting to know what was going on. Walking over and seeing the great leader Zevin in front of them, she'd rushed over to ask how it was possible. The leader smiled seeing Probity and showed the hollow disc of her to the two leaders, saying that it doesn't matter what they thought, red or blue skin was irrelevant, while lifting her up onto his shoulders, smiling at them. He goes on to tell them that the only thing that matters is a little girl wanted peace for her people. She didn't care what color skin they had, she just wanted them fighting to stop. With Probity giggling and smiling while up on Zevin's shoulders. He says that they could learn a lot looking through the eyes of a child, and that children don't see red or blue, they just see people and possible friends for them to play with. As a small red boy came over looking up at them and asking if they could play. Zevin smiles and sat down Probity, letting her go run off and play with the red boy, as other children, both red and blue, soon join them as well. He then says to the leaders that they've both got a lot to learn, and this time, he'd make sure they learn their lesson right. As Ben said that he and his team had other matters to handle, and so would be leaving now. The prophet thanked them for their help and offered them a handful of treasure for their journey home.